So, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today at our Human Synergistics webinar and discussion that we're joined today by Mr. Pieter van der Veen, consultant, leadership coach, and head of Room to Act Consulting in Köln. So thank you so much, Pieter, for taking the time to join us today and talk about the topic of tools, HS tools, I suppose, but tools for the fearless consultant. So exciting topic to discuss in terms of fearlessness in coaching and consulting. Why don't we start there? What is it about these tools that it makes them particularly helpful for the fearless consultant?
Let's put it that way. I think you have to be fearless in order to use it well. So the background of that title actually is that the tool tells a timeless story about thinking and behaving in a constructive way versus thinking and behaving in a defensive way. And that's somehow true, right? So the tool picks something up that is, in broad terms, you cannot say anything against it, right? You are constructive or you may not, depending on certain criteria, of course, sure, where we can observe it, where we can feel it, and so on. And it gives a lot of information, but I think you can get into deep trouble if you just relate on the tool itself. The tool opens up a very broad spectrum and space where a lot of topics lie more or less without indicating that somewhere underneath the tool, whether it's values, whether it's personality.
Yeah,
you know, there's a lot of stuff in there where I think that Human Synergistics picked up some of the causal factors leading up to a certain result or outcome of effectiveness, you call it. But still here, you can be in, I think, in deep trouble if you just rely on the circumplex, the picture itself.
Right.
And I would even say you can be into deep trouble if you rely just on the definitions and just on the things from a tool perspective that Human Synergistics offers, which are super helpful in order to get that picture in the room, because if you don't have it, you're lost. At least people that are come into, in contact with these topics for the first time, you need to have something here where they have visually something to grab on, and also in terms of content. I think that's a brilliant job done here. If they look on it and it's all blue, okay, good. You're lucky. It becomes a little bit more difficult if you have spreads, let's say the outcomes in the circumplex model. Now I'm talking across the whole spectrum. And it gets even more difficult if you see them around, the defensive styles around the 50% percentile, a little bit above. What does that tell, and so on and so forth. And then how do work towards a constructive way of dealing with these kind of results for the individual, for the team, but also on a cultural level. I think there you have to create, my little company is called Room to Act. You have to create a space where people can land, first of all, to gain some deeper trust in what they are seeing. And from that level, you can move on in very, I think I'm super humble with this, in very small steps. Yeah, that's at least what I experienced during the last decade with this tool. And I think therefore if you want to do this, you go against a lot of potential defensive reactions along the way. And you need to be a little bit of centered all the time, or when you're centered, you don't feel fear. And that's when you're fearless, you can navigate yourself and the clients through this with the help of the tool. Without the tool, it's difficult. But the bigger question here is also how you become fearless. To use the tool in a sustainable way along the consulting projects. That's where the title is coming from. I think the tool enables that. It plays a big role in letting everyone come to the same view, it's the same level of information, and go from there, based on where the individual, based on where the team, based on where the culture is located at the current state, which can also be, it's different from individual to individual, and also culture-wise. Although we might see the same profile, it can be a completely different cultural pattern, or a completely different leadership culture that's driving the constructive behavior. It can be coming from a power source. You can also use power in a constructive way. It's kind of, where do you come from? You can use it in a more pluralistic way. We would then see more people-oriented styles somewhere, maybe, but it's really depending on how deep you want to dig and dive into all these things in order then to create a change. I think the change, the transformation that comes with it, it depends on whether you understand the SS current situation, life conditions, personalities, leadership cultures, and then the tool gives you somehow the orientation of how to go from A to B, or maybe make a step in between, right? A, before you can even reach B somehow. Right?
I see what you're saying. I mean, it's one of the things I've always it's a double-edged sword, right? I mean, one of the real strengths and the reasons I got involved with, and I think we like the tools HS has, is that it's giving you really good information, accurate information, and also, information about behavioral and psychological patterns and culture, things that otherwise sort of are difficult to grasp and make tangible. So while that is a strength, I think what you're saying is that also comes with obviously some challenges. And part of those is having good information is not enough to create change. This is all dependent upon our ability to learn and understand this and do something about it. One of the things I like to say about HS reports is that, if you open the reports and you find anything in there that you don't like, don't worry, you can change it. That's the purpose of the report. But it really is dependent upon people doing something with this information in order to create the change. The instruments, the data, the reports, that valid, great, honest information is not going to create the change itself. And I think that starts to talk to some of the other challenges that you were introducing that require bravery, both on the part of the consultant, but also on the part of the coachee, right? I think it takes probably even more bravery for the person who's being coached through this, receiving this feedback, to be open to it, to listen to it, to take it seriously.
Right. Yeah, obviously they have to step out of some deeper patterns, maybe, when we are above the 50th percentile in the defensive styles. But it can also be if you have, let's say, some patterns that are more in the achievement orientation rather than on the people side, and vice versa. It can come to a transformation for someone who has really deep belief patterns in some of these areas, because at a certain point in time, there's the question of, can I accept it? Can I let it go first? And then what else can come, right? So this kind of dance between letting go some of the patterns that made me maybe successful or where I feel comfortable, versus, can you give me an option for that I can buy into, where I see kind of the you know, the reward for the price I pay when I go from A to B, because I don't have a clue how to do it right now, right? So the whole self-actualization topic of, you know, I'm self-actualizing, but, you know, I get into, but I have to feel there's a reward in here, because, you know, I don't pay just the price for that just to self-actualize, right? I want to see something where I have the feeling that it's of deeper meaning for me to do it.
Yeah.
And navigating through these areas, of course, takes a lot of bravery on the coaching side, right? But also on the consultant side, you never know if you're fully, you know, you can never say, I know all of this. It's not possible. If we do this, we would be God, right? It's like this kind of guru, God-like thing that I see a lot of consultants doing when they think they had it all, you know, they understood the tool and everything.
Yeah.
Then comes this, you know, kind of guru thing with it. But I would be saying it's more, the fearless consultant is more, I know that I don't know, you know what I mean? I take
Yeah.
about this Socrates view on these things. And so we have to do this journey together. And on a one-on-one, it's quite handleable. It becomes more and more difficult the more system related it becomes, the more team like it gets, or the bigger organizational parts of the organization, then it becomes challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we find, and I think you do too, probably, you know, common patterns across those kinds of levels. So like the things we were just talking about, things like, you know, when we try to encourage individuals or organizations through culture to do things differently, one of the first reactions you can expect is a little bit of resistance along the current culture or behavior patterns of the individual, you know. So there's always that challenge in doing things differently for the first time, whether I'm an individual, whether this is our team, whether this is our organization, right? Same thing with the goals of, you know, the self-actualization. You know, I'm going through this coaching so that I learn and grow, or our team is going through this coaching and development so that we can learn and grow and be more effective, or our organization is going through this kind of culture journey so that, you know, so you have the same sort of broad themes in terms of a starting point, an end point we want to move towards, some reason in terms of why we want to, so the basics of a development journey, and sort of giving clients, at least from the HS side, I think, good reliable data on, you know, where are you currently, how is that affecting you, your team, your business, where do you really want to go, where is sort of true north, and then, as you're saying, really putting in the baby steps along the way to make those changes happen. But in any case, we consistently find those sort of similar themes in development around whether we're talking about individuals, teams, or organizations. We need to think about some things carefully, like what happens when we start to fall back into old patterns? How can we justify and reinforce and encourage movement toward new patterns? Those kinds of important themes.
Right. The thing is, I don't look at it like a linear, let's go from A to B. It's, you have a strategic point of departure and a strategic point of arrival, and all of these kind of journeys, let's say. Where the courage and where all this comes in is when people realize there's a need to do this. You know, there's this emotional acceptance of this. And at the other end, what Don Beck from the spiral dynamics point of view called gamma traps. You know, when you feel like even you know where you come from and even you know where you want to go to, you fall into a deeper kind of hole where you don't know how to handle it. Although you rationally, mentally understand where you go to, something in your body is going against it, or something in the culture is espousing that they want to go there, or there is a, let's say from best example, HR perspective, there is this kind of hype around involving, integrating everyone. You know, there's this pluralistic tendency, but on the leadership side, there's a whole different leadership culture from a legacy point of view. When you mix this, then although you know where you start and where you want to go to, and you have all the data in the tool, you will run into these gamma traps on the individual level, sometimes on team level. Teams are more able to overcome in their container environment, but they will also face on the team boundary the challenge when they kind of manage through that they run into the next challenge, which is outside of the team, or how you cooperate across teams and so on. And then you have all that nice things going on in the overall cultural transformation projects, where these dynamics are present all the time, right? And the question is, how can you, first of all, allow these gamma traps to happen? Because I think when you go against it, that's dangerous, right? Because you cannot force it. If we do, like, say, a good, like you offer, right, a change plan, and then say there's a timeline for this, and people are in a gamma trap, you will then even create more psychological unsafe environments, right? So we have a lot of pressure and tensions sometimes. So we need to handle and say, okay, where are these areas? Can we really understand them? How can we help people to land safely first, and then make smaller steps in order to let them know what the reward is? And then at the end of the day, I mean, if we do retesting with the tool, somebody has gone through that process individually, it doesn't matter. Then the reward is just unbelievable, because when they see it in the tool, it's a reinforcing element that then shifts the whole thing really forward, right? The next loop is easier then.
It is easier.
There's the trust in that, right? And then say, okay, and we can measure, and what I somehow felt and all the trouble I've been through, yes, it was worth it, right? So it's that kind of dance between the tool, between what's really going on in the environment, and then the tool comes in, hopefully. So we have to plan the retesting very well when it comes in to reinforce something that can really create a transformational success, right? So that's overall how I see it, right?
Yeah, it's amazing the extent to which remeasuring really is part of the journey and part of keeping people moving. I mean, one of the things, it obviously sends a message to people that we expect development and improvement. We're going to be checking in. We expect learnings. We expect to see something changing and improving. So that's important. The other one is more, I think, a little more positive, and to your point, and it's hugely powerful, is that people really do see change in their results, their reports, their feedback, and that is extremely motivating and empowering. So I agree with you. The first development cycle is consistently the most challenging. If people can make it through that, see their efforts changing, see the improvement, be able to measure that and recognize it, then that really bodes positively for the next steps moving forward.
And I think that's a powerful message, because there's still a lot of people out there who think we cannot change.
Correct.
Which is in itself, of course, a very defensive statement if you look at it. And it is really coming from the personality profiles, where you are kind of locked into a certain type. And people think, like, if I'm that type, I've tried to get out, but I know I can't. They somehow use the same logic and understanding in that human synergistic field, and say, this, especially the red area, so the aggressive defensive styles, there are a lot of people who say, I cannot change this. It has helped, it will help, and it's just me. Sometimes it's on the passive defensive area as well. Sometimes it's culturally driven, both, like the redness, more individualistic, egocentric things, right? Whereas on the green side, we have more, it can also look like green or passive defensiveness. It's just attention, right? When in the Asian cultures, we see more that people are stepping back, observing before they just do anything, right? That can appear quite passive defensive, whereas in reality, it can be highly constructive, right? So we have also these kind of things, but people say, you know, the life conditions. They say in this life conditions, it's not possible to, you know, behave more constructively or think more constructively, and it may be even dangerous to do so. 100%. When we had some kind of workshops in China, and you could, you know, feel that, you know, they had real problems they don't think in kind of this black and whiteness or constructive is always good, because they have to navigate in a more difficult environment with all these things, right? So is it now more in favor to have a little bit of that defensiveness shown in your report or not? It's also difficult. You cannot say yes or no, because you have to understand what's below or underneath this profile. Now, you cannot just say go into the blue zone. It can be even very, very dangerous, right? And not acceptable if you think about speaking up to your, you know, as a direct report to your boss or something. It becomes a little bit more tricky how to do it then, right? But having the overall story is still true. The overall story is still true. In the constructive styles, there's energy. In the constructive styles, there's truthfulness. In the constructive styles, there are relationships. In the constructive styles, you move on to something that is great, right? So it's still there, but you have to read the whole thing with different glasses in individual environments, right? And people think from this experience, they cannot even change this.
Right. But, I mean, what you're describing in terms of national culture, we find the very same thing in organizational culture. In fact, I think that's where we first noticed it, meaning, you know, back in the 70s and early 80s, when HS was using things like LSI and LWS to coach and develop leaders, it was fairly frequent for leaders to say, well, I'd love to be more, you know, curious and outgoing and experiment and try new things, but in this organization or within this context and setting, that's not tolerated, that's not possible, that's not, you know, in whatever way something that can be done. So it's a really interesting discussion to have, because there's the one confusion that we oftentimes run into along the lines of people using human synergistics tools and believing them to be something like personality assessments or something that measures skills or competencies or sort of fixed characteristics, when we're actually measuring adaptive developmental factors against thinking and behavioral patterns primarily, that, you know, can be changed. The great quote of, you know, the only thing that you can control in your life is the way that you think and the way that you behave, is pretty applicable. So that's sort of the one. The other is that even if we do accept that these are patterns that I can change and control and choose when to use them, that's also needs to be kept in mind with regard to the context that I am within, whether that's nationally or the business culture or the leader that I work for. You know, to what extent can I get away with these behaviors, and what's specifically encouraged in me as a member of the business or as a direct report of this leader. And of course, that's where we get right into OCI and LI and the topics that you also have a lot of familiarity with. So.
Right. I think all these tools have different strengths. Yeah. So when you look at the LSI, it's a tool that comes with really raw data, right? That's your initial tool, right? Where Lafferty somehow had the first, research view on. It comes very neutral. It gives you a lot of information on the line items, on the effectiveness criteria. When you put them all together, you can create a story out of this and see if your hypothesis that you have with this really land with the client, right? I love this tool because it's so basically so raw, in data. It gives you, it doesn't lay something over it where interpretation is already given. So you can really do the kind of correlation between what we see in the line items on the individual styles, what we see in the circumflex, and then how does this translate to the criteria of effectiveness? This is great, right? And then you can navigate more or less with hypothesis and then see what the client is willing to accept also, and where it's willing to do something differently. So I really love the LSI, though knowing it is not primarily built for leadership, right? And it has a lot of questions going with it and so on and so forth. When we go to leadership, the LWS, as you just mentioned it, the leadership work styles, they offer you a lot of interpretation from a consulting perspective. So it offers you text that comes with it. And what I love most about the LWS is that you can also type in free text, so that it allows, the as is real, stuff to land in there. If you get the people to understand that, I think there's a huge opportunity with the LWS there. Also, it translates the LSI data somehow, or it's built on the platform, but it translates it into what does it tell me about leadership effectiveness in a certain way, how they work, is it effective or not, and it gives a bit of a pros and cons view to things. It doesn't give you the just linear traction, good, bad. It's just, if something's in there, they have done a tremendous work, I think, a very good job in balancing what are the cons. Also, if we see a more defensive profile, there's still cons in there. And I love that, right? Because there can be strengths in there on a situational basis. On a deep pattern, which the tool measures, of course, it's not in favor, but you will also see that in the pros versus cons thing, right? And I think that's great. But it comes, actually, you come already with the whole content, let's say. If you have a leadership group for the first time, makes a lot of sense to use it, because they can sit back, they can read it through, they can work with the content, they can understand the circumflex for themselves a lot better. So it creates a lot of trust into the tool. And they can always go back to this text, the content verbally written there. And it helps a lot, right? When you go forward, you may not always use it again. Maybe when you go forward, you can also use the leadership impact, where we see the leadership impact. It's more, I think it's more theoretical based tool. And I don't say that this is negative, but you can see in the leadership impact that it is based on, and it's also when you read through the report, that a lot of this comes from books, studies, and so on. And that makes the leadership impact a little bit more theoretical, totally theoretical if I compare it to the LSI, right? But the idea here is brilliant. The idea is what drives a constructive leadership impact, what drives a defensive leadership impact. The story around that is super powerful. It's only more difficult to use it with the client. If you don't have anything where you can demonstrate it in a way that people can grasp it quickly. I think maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this, because I think when we had the horse coaching last time in the regional meeting, you can there demonstrate quite quickly what your impact is or not, because the horse will never lie to you in the reaction, right? Maybe you can give us an understanding here how we could use the leadership impact with kind of different techniques.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So kind of bridging two different worlds. I'll try to give this quickly at a high level. I mean, assuming that the audience watching this is familiar with human synergistics models and is aware of things like the satisfaction versus security orientation in the model. What we're really looking at with leadership impact is something very specific. It's the extent to which an individual leader encourages these various behaviors in the people whom they lead. So when we look at individual behavior, as we do with things like LSI and LWS, you find a lot of how people behave, especially within their work context, is influenced by their leaders, what their leaders encourage them to do and recognize them doing and prohibit them from doing, and those sorts of things. So behavior, if it's not, you haven't heard this already, behavior is strongly driven by leadership, and that's why culture is driven by leadership as well. Some of human synergistics tools, specifically the organizational effectiveness inventory, as well as the leadership and management impact inventories, also actually measure the factors that explain that impact, meaning not only are we looking at the behavior that an individual leader is encouraging in other people, but what the leader is doing currently that is encouraging that form of behavior. So, you know, if we look at a team, we could talk about achievement, well-known style. So if I'm encouraging my team, I'm hoping to encourage them to work towards goals and make decisions and get things done and learn from mistakes and so on. In order to encourage teams to do that, leaders need to be using some specific strategies, things like communicating and clarifying what the goals are, giving good positive feedback for when people do well and achieve good results, so that people understand what good work is, so that they understand what they need to work toward. So, you know, that sort of bridge. In any case, it's sort of surprisingly similar to some factors that you find between riders and horses. This technique has been used for leadership development for a very long time, but the point is that very much like the way that leaders approach and interact with their people influences their people's behavior and thus performance, so too does the way in which a rider approaches a horse and interacts with it influences the way that the horse responds to that rider and behaves and performs as a result. It's interesting because these are things that can be observed, and so I'm working with Sabine Kildorf, who does this sort of equestrian leadership training, to combine the human synergistics tools with the experience of actually taking leaders out, handing them a horse and having them to try to influence that horse and ask that horse to do some things and get some tasks done, sort of like how they might as a leader be expected to encourage their team to get tasks done or encourage their team to work towards goals. And that enables us to build a bridge. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, which is for me then the second step. And if you have landed on the LWS, then it becomes really interesting. What are the kind of leadership strategies on the next level that I should work on in order to create a certain impact on the people I lead or on the organization I lead? I think it's a good way to do one after the other, not starting with the leadership impact right away. That's my personal, it's just pure individual preference here. As I know that some people use the LI in combination with the OCI, OEI So because leadership drives culture or creates a certain type of culture, and they work good together. And so as I love these step-by-step things, I think once people landed on the leadership impact, and they have also what I like about the leadership impact, I have to say, is that we have prescriptive versus restrictive strategies in there, where we see again like the pros and cons in the LWS. We see here also that it's not about all the time being nice to somebody, which is, some people think like creating constructive impact on others means you have to use strategies that are more pluralistic, embracing, nice, and so on. But actually what we are seeing is that there's a kind of, you know, optimal mix of certain strategies that are more open, creating more openness, are more embracing and so on, but also that come clearly to the point, that drive things forward. They should not stand out, but they're also in there. And if that relationship is well balanced, then it creates the best impact, or the best outcomes of effectiveness at the end of the day. That's what I really like about the leadership impact.
Yeah, having that causal sort of structure and understanding, as well as the clarity around what I need to do differently as a leader, more frequently, less frequently, is very, very, yes. I agree.
Then after that, the whole thing about how do we actually structure or build our company, the climate, like what the OEI, the organizational effectiveness inventory measures, in order then to have a real impact that is lasting on the organizational level, where when you have done the LI to a larger extent, people already understand that the leadership part plays a major role. They already know how the leadership strategies can be built, and then from there they can, I mean, if ideally, right, it never works that well, but ideally then gives the chance to then embrace the other causal factors, you call it, so the things that are driving the culture and cultural outcomes of effectiveness, because you then can make a sense, okay, there's more to this than just leadership.
Right. Oh yeah.
Behavior, which is a great part, or the greatest part, but the larger the organization, the more you depend on other causal factors that help you to sustain kind of the constructive styles, right? So we see that thing, a lot of agile management things floating around that should help to build that. But I think that's a good step-by-step approach, right? So if you use all of those tools together, like the LSI on the broader people level, the LWS as a starting point to get leaders on board, the LI that they improve the way, the strategies they use in order to create an impact, and then you use the OEI and the OCI to even drive the structural process-oriented topics, then it could change really the organization one at a time, right?
That's a very very concrete way to ensure that. Just to add to it, one of the interesting things, so you mentioned this already, there are some parallels between leadership impact. We're getting into sort of advanced HS here, but so there's some parallels between leadership and management impact and the OEI climate factors, those basically the strategies with which either the organization in OEI or the leaders or managers as individuals in LI and MI sort of use and exert their authority over members within the business. In any case, we have several clients who use both of those tools, and I'm always really interested in the similarities between them, meaning the sort of the way in which the organization's systems are designed and structured are surprisingly similar to the methods by which leaders use strategies within the business. So a simple example would be, if the organization, for example, does not have very well structured or defined channels of communication, we don't communicate particularly well, we don't have methods for people speaking, we don't sort of systemically as an organization have communication effectively. What you find is leaders will tend in those organizations to be less effective at communicating with their people personally. And you also find patterns around things like reward and punishment. Organizations that focus systemically on primarily giving negative feedback will tend to include leaders who more heavily rely on negative feedback. So, they're reinforcing one another, but the leaders are creating those systems, and those systems are influencing the understanding of leaders as to how we lead and influence people here in the business, and those sort of work off of each other. So you always find, or I've always found, patterns between those two seemingly very different things, how leaders lead and how the organization is structured, but they don't both certainly connect.
And the organizational systems can also help you to overcome your own limits. So if we are running out of energy for ourselves, we may understand again what constructive and defensive thinking and behavior is. We also know what kind of optimum leadership strategies would help us, but we just don't have energy right now to act in that kind of way. It may be that, right? So you come more or less automatically defensive because of the level of energy. Then the system or the way of how you run meetings, if that is quite of in a constructive way organized, and it becomes the common way of doing things somewhere, then the common way of doing things can help you to overcome that personal limit in that particular meeting, right? Somebody else can stand up. It's a typical way of how to check in, how to, let people talk one by one. Everybody has a voice. You brainstorm, you create options, you come together, have a result, and you go out, and you're back in the game. Yeah. So really both. When I look at all these things, at the end of the day, it's all about creating we, W-E. Yeah. How can we create a we, which is all the magic that needs to be done? Because a we, and use now Ken Wilber kind of thinking, which is, I think, brilliant, is kind of, we understand each other. So, and that's not given. That's not a given thing. We have to work for this all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. And all that kind of, constructive, all these kind of things should help us to create more we's that are then actualizing things together. Yeah. By understanding each other better together. So and that can come from kind of individual perspective, can come from the system perspective. So the I, we, it's whole thing around that. At the end of the day, the we part is what really matters, because this needs to be created every day. And if the system can help us to, create a room to act, to use a space where this is supported from a structural point of view, that's of tremendous help, because we will always run into limits individually. And if the system is lacking this, then the espoused value to have creative cultures will come under pressure, and people will build up some mistrust slowly. They will become defensive slowly. So they use very, very small patterns, because they see we do not create we's. We something is getting in our way here, right? It's the individual here, the system there, and then I think, when I want to do it, it's all on me now. I have to take 500% responsibility, because everything else is not helping me there, right? So so everything, but I think that's how I understand my job, is creating a space in order to help people come to that we. That is then, in the ideal world, completely a blue culture. There is no, in the ideal world, it should support something that is highly actualizing, highly achievement oriented, and highly on the people's side, helping each other, also going beyond your initial area of responsibility. So that would be the ideal, but that's paradise. And somehow we will never get there, I think, but it's a good Northern Star. It's a good, it's a good idea of where we should aim for.
Absolutely. As long as we keep taking steps forward, hopefully we'll get where we're going sooner or later. So, good topics, all very broad. So let me ask something to try to focus a little. What clients that you work with, what kinds of projects do you use human synergistics tools within? I mean, I know you use individual level, team, you've been heavily involved in the use of organizational and culture level tools. What is the purpose behind those projects, those initiatives, the use of the tools with your clients? What are the reasons? Yeah.
So basically, I'm more or less involved in broader cultural transformation projects where you can use all of these tools, right? All of the tools that we have just discussed. From my own belief and perspective, you may have already guessed, I come more from a bottom-up approach than from a top-down. When it is the early stage of a transformational initiative, so that people get used to these things first, right? That's the main, that's what I do at clients, because I of course, you should do somehow what the need is of the client first. I try to convince those that we start more with teams, with individuals, and of course, we have to have the backing of the leadership team. Without it, it's difficult. But we cannot always start with the leadership team for different reasons, right? But we have to somehow, I believe, more into the small step approach, and then the more mature people get with all these, the more they speak the same language. Yeah. Then I'm really in favor for the leadership impact and the OEI and OCI tool, because then the tact and rhythm is there in order to keep make the snowball rolling in a positive way, that we don't get distracted in some part. But it's mainly these kind of projects. They are long term. So all the clients I have, I've never lost them. Of course, I'm more or less involved sometimes, but it's a continuous, infinite game what we play here all the time. But the more mature people get, the more we use the impact tools and the OEI, OCI. And also we return what I also say, if they're completely familiar with all of this, then you go back into real consulting abbreviations. That means how to optimize processes, how to optimize the systems, how to get a system view on the hierarchy, work with viable system model, and so on, because they got the idea then we are a system. We are working on a we. Now, how can we structure our processes, also our roles and responsibilities in a way that help us to sustain that? Exactly. But they can only understand that at a later stage in the maturity of the whole change initiative, right? So I'm working on the whole spectrum everywhere. Yeah. It's that's why I may come across a little bit something of everything, but it's actually like that, right? So it's kind of what's the right phase we are in, what stage have we achieved, and what's the next level, what's the next stage, what are potential gamma traps we're facing in bridging, how do we overcome? So it's a continuous work where you cannot, there's not just a beginning and an ending. It's a circle. It's like a circumflex. It's a circle.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, but every client is in a different place. They're all doing different things. So it is very different, but at the same time, I think you're also right. There's a certain structure or progress to the story, if you know what I mean, right? There's a certain time when we talk to organization, right? There are certain questions we have to answer first before we can get to the next step of that. Are you familiar? It reminds me of a very similar sort of concept of the levels of consciousness, organizational levels of consciousness, by Sean McCarthy. This is Australian HS content. Familiar with that?
I'm familiar with that. I mean, it reminds me on spiral dynamics, because I think that Claire Graves laid the foundation for all of these kind of stages, conceptions, right? Where then Wilbur came with the awkward, the whole, lines and so on. I think the Australians were the first one in the human synergistics environment who picked that idea up.
Yeah.
But I also have to say at this time, I don't like what they did. They don't, the way of how they transferred is too much using the tool logic, the circumplex tool logic. Okay. Which is not the logic of the spiral, but it is not about, I think they did it. It helped me to find into that topic.
Right.
But it is the same logic. It's the same logic of the, HPO developmental stages and so on and so forth. I think the powerful message is more that the tools help in every stage.
Yeah.
If particular tools are better in a different stage than others, so it helps you to orchestra the tool suite in a certain way as well. So it feeds, the one feeds into the other. It's not about comparing or we should integrate all of this. I think that adds to confusion. I think we have two different concepts that when you use them in the right way, help each other, but you should not try to fully integrate them. And I think that the Australians try to fully integrate them, and that has a certain artificial notion to it, okay? Yeah. But doesn't matter. I think they did it very early. I think they were the first one. I mean, it's already 15 years ago, right?
It's some time, yeah.
Yes, and so it's, what are we talking about? Brilliant job, right? Yes, yeah, I mean, but the thing is, when we use all of these kind of maps and then embrace the reality,
right,
then it becomes a very, very powerful liaison of how you can really orchestrate transformation and change. It needs everything, it needs everything, really everything. And you need to just find a way to know where you are. It's like the I Ching, in China, where you say, the book of changes. It always depends what the situation is like and how it's evolving in waves, like Wilbur says, in order to understand where you are and where you can even go. Mm-hmm. And I think the tool always comes into and says, where are we right now on the constructive, on the defensive stance? Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters, right? If we want to create it's a blue area.
Yeah.
So we always know with everything that we do, where we are in terms of what really matters. Yeah. I think it's like the OKR, right? The objective key results concept. It gives you part of the end goal.
Yeah.
And then the key results at a particular moment in time, which is super powerful because it adds clarity in all that mess. Because it's the whole thing is a messy process. The tool brings it down and says, okay, that's the OKR. This is the objective, constructive. Here are we with our key results on the certain, styles, on the strategies, on the criteria of effectiveness on the individual level, on the OEI, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, without this, there is no, in an infinite game, you need some points of stability. If you
Yes.
don't have points of stability, boom,
Yeah.
the whole brain or the individual will just be lost. The teams will be lost, and the organization will be lost. Which is also, I think, people that decide to use it should be aware it's an infinite game. It is never over.
Sure.
Once the next competition comes in, the digital transformation, whatever comes at you, it will change the whole thing again, because the circumplex is not a start and end. If you change life conditions, if you change the challenge and the environment, it will have a different circumplex outcome. Yeah. Because there are more risks now, more challenges, people will get more security orientated again, and so on. So how can we now return with this new environment, with these new challenges, into the self-actualization part again together?
Yeah. In
creating the achievements that we need for our stakeholders, right? So it's an endless loop of, that's nice about it, right? That's why I love it. It's because it's not artificial kind of measuring something and then we are there and then we are done. That's not about, life is not like that. It's a continuous kind of birth, maturity, destruction, renewal kind of loop, right? And I think the tool helps organizations to navigate that complexity. And that's why I will never, there is no reason to change it. Though I have to say that the basic idea comes from a humanistic psychology point of view, which is, when you look at Maslow coming in with this, which is a brilliant guy, and he did also the developmental line of needs, which is somehow lying underneath the circumplex model, right?
Yeah, that's right.
He thought that once you fulfill a need at a certain stage, like you overcome your survival needs, you go into social needs, and so on, then you come to the self-actualization need once you have fulfilled the others, and then in a transpersonal area. So they call it, I think, the transcendence self-actualizer. What he did not put into consideration is exactly what we just talked about. It's that it's not an automatic process.
Right.
You can fulfill one need and you go into the next. That's not how it works. And I think also in the questions on the LSI, you can sense the notion of humanistic psychology in there. Mm-hmm. There's a little limit here because it's a very idealistic view. It's, mobilizing full humanness, full human potential. It sounds all great. The thing is, it just does not happen this way. And I think who made this clear is Claire Grace with the spiral dynamics thing, because he notices that for certain people, they will be just locked in some stages of development. And to these stages of development, they will be also locked in maybe some belief systems. When they're locked into this, they may also be locked into certain needs, right?
Right.
If they are totally locked in, the danger of becoming defensive with this being locked in becomes great if you see others that come from a different perspective. And then we have the whole mess going on, right? We have then I versus you.
Yeah. Which
we see also, with the whole, problem in Russia and so on, where we now facing a very, power-oriented belief system using very modern weapon technology. So it's also a mixture of things. Mm. And, people that overcame certain things on this, at least that's how I see it theoretically. I'm not saying that this is the truth right now, right? It's just interesting to reflect. They will not understand what's happening there and vice versa. Right. You have all this in the communication. And when I look at the news and everybody's having a say right now, I can only stand like this and say, now every stage comes into and has a space to make these conversations,
Mhm.
and you think, what a mess, you know, who's now orchestrating that mess? It's a complete mess. And it can be highly not even defensive, but destructive this time.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So it's really a serious issue. And I think that kind of, there's in the circumplex, we still have that deeper belief in full humanness that comes from Maslow. I love it, of course. If I would have a wish, I would like the world to be like this, what I experience, and that's where the courage and where the fearless consultant comes back into play, is to be fully honest that the world is not working like this.
Yeah.
And but it doesn't, also on the other hand, it doesn't matter. There are opportunities to handle it.
Yes.
Obviously, we have to work together. It's not on a single person that can make this happen. And I think therefore it's important to have webinars like this, even that we bring it into the world. Maybe nobody understands us, but it doesn't matter. You know, sometimes they will.
There you go. Well, it comes back to creating the we once again, I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Without a we will get nowhere.
Yeah.
You can write the best, brilliant books, and a lot of them have been written. It will not. It will help maybe, but only those who use the book in order to create a we out of the book.
Yeah.
And so the time for clever concepts is over. I mean, everything is out there. We don't need anything else anymore. The time is now to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a huge gap between knowing and doing.
Doing.
Right? And to have the courage to do it. I mean, it's a courageous thing.
Yeah. That's and that's the gap that we always talk about with our tools. You know, the tools can really give you a lot of information so that you can know something and learn something. The trick is whether people take that information and do anything with it. So that knowing doing gap is certainly something at the top of mind when we help clients to take these steps forward.
That's the challenge.
That's the challenge. Take some bravery. Very good, Peter. Thank you so much for your insights. I see that we're already over time. I appreciate all of the input, sir.